وبه نستعين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين.
اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد
وآل محمد.
السلام عليكم جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته. We're continuing our recitation of Surah An-Nisa, and today we will be reciting from verses number 75 to 79. 75 to 79. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. وما لكم لا تقاتلون في سبيل الله والمستضعفين من الرجال والنساء والولدان الذين يقولون ربنا أخرجنا من هذه القرية الظالم أهلها واجعل لنا من لدنك وليا واجعل لنا من لدنك نصيرا. الذين آمنوا يقاتلون في سبيل الله والذين كفروا يقاتلون في سبيل الطاغوت فقاتلوا أولياء الشيطان إن كيد الشيطان كان ضعيفا. ألم تر إلى الذين قيل لهم كفوا أيديكم وأقيموا الصلاة وآتوا الزكاة فلما كتب عليهم القتال إذا فريق منهم يخشون الناس كخشية الله أو أشد خشية وقالوا ربنا لما كتبت علينا القتال لولا أخرتنا إلى أجل قريب قل متاع الدنيا قليل والآخرة خير لمن اتقى ولا تظلمون فتيلا. أينما تكونوا يدرككم الموت ولو كنتم في بروج مشيدة وإن تصبهم حسنة يقولوا هذه من عند الله وإن تصبهم سيئة يقولوا هذه من عندك قل كل من عند الله فما لهؤلاء القوم لا يكادون يفقهون حديثا. ما أصابك من حسنة فمن الله وما أصابك من سيئة فمن نفسك وأرسلناك للناس رسولا وكفى بالله شهيدا. صدق الله العلي العظيم.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
The opening verse that we recited today is talking about a very important group of people who have been mentioned a number of times in the Qur'an. And this group are known as the Mustad'afin. The word Mustad'afin comes from the word Dha'f. Dha'f means weak. Mustad'af is somebody who has been weakened in the land. It's referring to a group of people, one, they are not in power. Two, those who are in power are oppressing them, tyrannizing them. Three, they cannot change their own state. They're not strong enough to change their own state. They're relying upon others to be able to help them. And four, not only are they being oppressed, but their rights have been taken away from them. Their freedoms have been taken away from them. And one of the most important rights that has been taken away from them is their right to religion, their right to conscience, and their right to learn and practice the true faith. Now, in the context of this verse, it's referring to those Muslims who had remained in Mecca. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that look at these Muslims who have remained in Mecca, they are mustad'af, they are weak, their rights have been taken away from them, and some of them who want to openly practice their faith cannot practice their faith. And there are others who want to learn about the faith, they cannot learn about the faith. Now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking to the people of Medina, the Muslims of Medina, and He's saying, "Ma lakum, what is wrong with you? That you don't want to struggle in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whilst وَالْمُسْتَضْعَفِينَ مِنَ الرِّجَالِ وَالنِّسَاءِ وَالْوِلْدَانِ, those who have been weakened in the land, amongst the men and the women and the children, they're crying out, they're saying, رَبَّنَا أَخْرِجْنَا مِنْ هَذِهِ الْقَرْيَةِ الظَّالِمِ أَهْلُهَا. Oh Allah, take us out from this land, the land in which its people or its rulers are oppressive, and send us a guardian and send us someone who will help us. Now they're making dua, and sometimes we make dua for them as well. But it's not enough for us just to make dua for them. Allah is saying, if you truly want their state to change, you have to try and you have to help them as well. Now this verse is important because it tells us in Islam, people were asked to do jihad for two reasons. People were asked to struggle for two reasons. The first reason is to protect their lives, to protect their property, to protect their land, to protect their family and their dignity. The second reason to do jihad is to protect people's rights, to protect their freedoms and their liberties. And the most important right that a person has, his right to religion and the true religion. Alright? Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, when we're asking you to struggle in the way of Allah, don't think that it's the same as asking you to struggle in any other path. See, in the past, people were used to this mindset. If I lived in Rome, I fought for the Roman king. And if I lived in Persia, I fought for the Persian king. So I fought for this king or that king, but there's no real difference between the two kings. I just happen to be on this side of the border, and that person happened to be on that side of the border. That was it. Allah says this is not the case when we ask you to fight for us. When you're fighting for Allah, when you're struggling in the way of Allah, you're struggling for values which are godly values. You're struggling for people's rights. You're struggling for people's freedoms. You're struggling for values and not just any one person. And those who are not struggling in the way of Allah, they're struggling for things like power, like land, like wealth. They're struggling for personal interests and not for values. It also tells you a very important point in this verse. It's telling you that in every society, and in every time, and in every place, there is always going to be a struggle between the awliya of Allah and the awliya of shaitan. كُلُّ يَوْمٍ عَاشُرًا كُلُّ أَرْضٍ كَرْبَلَاء. Right? Even if this is not a hadith, it's still a very powerful statement. In every society and in every heart, the struggle is happening. The only question that remains is, which side of the struggle am I on? That's the only doubt over there. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about the people who struggle not for values, but for their own interests. And what becomes of their state? Now, we go back to Mecca. When the Muslims before Hijrah were in Mecca, they were being oppressed. And some of them became tired of being oppressed. Because remember one thing, they lived in Mecca longer than they lived in Medina. Right? From the age of 40 till the age of 53, the Prophet of Allah was in Mecca. And he struggled for 13 years. He only spent 10 years in Medina. So now these Muslims came to the Holy Prophet and said, Ya Rasulullah, give us the permission for jihad. And the Prophet said, I have not been given permission for jihad. I will wait for the command from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the philosophy was this. Right now we're going to build our faith. We're going to strengthen our iman. We're going to strengthen the ummah. We're going to build the ukhuwah between the ummah. So the Prophet told them, right now you've been told to recite salat, which strengthens your connection with God, and give zakat, which strengthens the Muslim community. Then they went to Medina. Now in Mecca, their interests were in danger. So they wanted to struggle. They wanted to do jihad. Then they went to Medina. Life became very comfortable there. They found things to do, they found a piece of land, they had a house over there. Suddenly the Prophet said, now it's time for jihad. Now it's time for struggle. They came to the Holy Prophet, Ya Rasulullah, we don't think this is the right time. We think you need to delay it. Right? Some people will even tell the 12th Imam, when he reappears, now it's not the time. We think you should delay it, right? You should delay it, right? So now look what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says about them. People who struggle for themselves and not for principles and values. Listen to this verse of the Quran. أَلَمْ تَرَ إِلَى الَّذِينَ قِيلَ لَهُمْ Don't you see those when they were told, كُفُّ أَيْدِيَكُمْ Hold off, don't go to battle, hold off fighting for now. وَأَقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةِ But establish prayers. وَآتُوا الزَّكَاةِ And give charity. And then later, فَلَمَّا كُتِبَ عَلَيْهِمُ الْقِتَالِ Fighting was prescribed for them. إِذَا فَرِيقٌ مِّنْهُمْ Suddenly you see some of them يَخْشَوْنَ النَّاسَ كَخَشْيَةِ اللَّهِ They're afraid of facing people the way they should have in their hearts, the fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. No, if a person does not learn to fear God, not only will he fear people, he will even fear them more than he should have feared Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. كَخَشْيَةِ اللَّهِ أَوْ أَشَدَّ خَشْيَةً Or their fear is even greater. And they will say, Ya Allah, why have you prescribed fighting for us right now? You should really delay it. You should delay the struggle for a later time. And there's no reason for doing that because people are suffering at this time. Now, one of the reasons that they were afraid to go to the battlefield was because they were afraid of losing their lives. And they did not want to lose their lives. Life was pretty good at that time. They had a lot of amenities, right? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling them, what are you afraid of? You're afraid of losing your life? The life of this world is only a few days. Mata'u dunya qaleel. Right? It doesn't matter how long you have lived. The question you'll be asked on the Day of Judgment is whatever life we gave you, what have you done with it? This was the message of Imam Hussein. He said, you know what, even if you offer me death, death is better than living a life of indignity and living in such a society. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to them, you know, one day you have to die. Let's say you don't go to the battlefield today. You will save your lives. How long? 1 year? 2 years? 10 years? 20 years? 50 years? More than that? Until today, we don't know of anybody who has lived forever. It's a very beautiful verse of the Quran. You want to remember this verse. Allah says, أَيْنَمَا تَكُونُوا Wherever you are. Verse number 78. أَيْنَمَا تَكُونُوا Wherever you are, يُدْرِكْكُمُ الْمَوْتِ Death will catch to you. وَلَوْ كُنْتُمْ فِي بُرُوجٍ مُشَيَّدَةٍ Even if you are up in fortified towers where nobody can come and kill you or touch you, you will still face death. Now, I think these verses are very much applicable to us today as a Muslim community. Sometimes we're not afraid of losing our life, we're afraid of losing our lifestyle. And we have to remind ourselves, okay, even if we lose this lifestyle for the sake of values and for the sake of God, how many years will we have to struggle? 10 years? 15 years? 20 years? And then we go in the hereafter. Somebody came up to me today and said, should I live in this city near the masjid in Richmond? Or should I move farther away? It's cheaper there. I get a bigger house over there, right? But I'll be further away from the community. And I said, no, stay over here. They said, but this, but that. And I said, well, how long are you going to struggle? The life of this world, are you going to live forever over here? Obviously not. Few days of struggling, but being near the masjid, being on the right path, raising your children up on the right path, and then in the hereafter, inshallah, with the Ahlul Bayt. So few years of struggle. Now, Allah makes one more point about people who struggle not for values, but for their own interests. For them, victory is the most important thing, right? See, for a believer, being on the victorious side is not important. Being on the right side is more important. Victory or no victory. But people who don't struggle for values, they struggle for self-interest, For them, being victorious is important. So they used to come to the Holy Prophet. Whenever they were victorious, they would say, this is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And He gave us victory because we are deserving of victory. And then whenever they were not victorious, whenever they lost, they would come to the Holy Prophet and say, Ya Rasulullah, this loss happened because of you. You weren't prepared. You didn't have a good strategy. You weren't planned. Right? And this is human condition. This is how we are as human beings. When things are going well, we credit ourselves. It is because of me. And when things are not going well, we're always looking to blame somebody else. Everybody but myself. And one thing a believer always does, he first looks for faults within himself, and then looks for fault within others. And as long as we have that sort of approach, we're always going to be successful. Why? Because even when we're going down the wrong path, we're looking to come back to the right path. We're not making excuses. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says no. So let's come to that verse. وَإِن تُصِبْهُمْ حَسَنَةٌ يَقُولُ هَذِهِ مِنْ عِنْدِ اللَّهِ. When something good happens for them, they say this is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because we deserved it. وَإِن تُصِبْهُمْ سَيِّئَةٌ. And something bad happens for them, يَقُولُ هَذِهِ مِنْ عِنْدِكَ. They say this happened because of you, Ya Rasulullah. Tell them, قُلْ كُلٌّ مِنْ عِنْدِ اللَّهِ. Whatever happens, don't blame the Holy Prophet. Whatever happens because God made that happen, and because you deserved it, or you did not deserve to get the victory, so you didn't get the victory. Now, the next verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, in fact, at a deeper level, whenever something good happens, it's because of Allah. And whenever something bad happens in your life, it's because of yourself. Now a person says, how can this happen? When it's good, you credit Allah. When it's bad, I can't blame Allah, I have to blame myself. How does this work? Either in both cases, you go for Allah. In both cases, I credit myself and blame myself. Now we've talked about this. And I don't want to get very philosophical about it because I know I've talked about this 3 to 4 times. Okay? But I just came across an example mentioned in one of the Tafseers. Now it's just an example, so don't push the example too much. Just try to understand the best message we can take from the example. This scholar is saying, the best example I can give you is when the sun is shining on the earth. So whenever the sun is shining on the earth, there is half of the earth that is exposed to sunlight, and there is half of the earth that is not exposed to sunlight. That half of the earth which is exposed to sunlight, it has to be grateful for the sun, right? And say the sun has given us this sunlight. That half which does not have the sunlight cannot blame the sunlight and say, well, it's not shining on my side. It's got to blame itself to say, I am not turned towards the sunlight. So where there is the sunlight, you attribute it to the sun, and where there isn't, well, we say, no, that side has not been able to turn towards the rahmah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Sallallahu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.